So welcome everyone to the Institute for Liberal Values Liberal Values Lab. And this is where we invite speakers to come and share their knowledge and then to open up for community and discussion. And today we've got Angel Eduardo. I think most of you probably know him, but he is the president of the board for the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, FAIR. He's also a senior writer and editor for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, and most recently is a senior advisor for Greenhouse Scholars, which is an awesome program. If you aren't familiar with it, check it out. They help people who don't have a lot of resources in college and then to excel beyond college. So before we get started, Angel, a little bit about ILV for some of you who might not know. We're a non-sectarian consortium that provides the skills and resources to promote liberal values and develop liberal communities. I would encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. We have a couple of new offerings coming up in February. We've got a new course called Communism Exposed, and there's more about that on our website, ilvalues.org, as well as it will be listed in our newsletter. We also welcome any donations for our future programming and all of your support. So with that, thank you very much. And Angel, I leave it to you to get us started.
Well, thank you, Jen. Thank you for having me. I'm also an advisor for ILV, which I think is just as important to mention.
This is true. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see you all right now because we've got this presentation thing going, but thank you very much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time. I know how valuable everyone's time is. I will do my best to make the most of it. I have a presentation I will try to work through as quickly as I can because the most fun part about these is the Q&A section where difficulties and challenges are brought up and we kind of work through them together. But I'll just give you an overview. What we're here to talk about is what I call star manning. I'll explain what that is in a bit. But first, I want to take you back to circa 1989. And I was watching this episode of Sesame Street, and I was about 4 years old. Now, I managed to track down the episode number and find this screenshot, but I haven't been able to find the clip. But basically, what's going on in this clip here is Snuffleupagus, the big elephant or mammoth type thing, and Elmo are on either side of this blue mailbox on the street. And Snuffleupagus keeps saying that the mailbox is small, and Elmo keeps saying the mailbox is big. And they just keep going back and forth like that. And obviously, the lesson that you're supposed to draw is, of course, as the viewer, you can see why both of them think that way. And you can see why they can't understand why the other person thinks differently, because you have this other vantage point. And something about this clip stuck with me. 34 years later, I still remember it. And I managed to track it down because I remembered it well enough. And I think that is so much the key of so many of our issues. I don't have to tell you how difficult it is to have conversations about contentious topics. So even a mailbox can get people on either side to just, completely miss one another's perspective, right? So obviously what's going on here is Elmo is a small person, so the mailbox is bigger than him, and he's going to think, relative to me, the mailbox is big. Snuffleupagus, obviously, the other way around. He's a big guy. The mailbox is small to him. And it's only through understanding the other person's perspective, where they're coming from, that they can understand why they see reality the way they do. Now, here's another example. You've probably seen this meme, right? There's a number on the floor. One person's seeing it as a 6, the other person's seeing it as a 9. And the message that goes with it is, just because you're right doesn't mean that I'm wrong. You just haven't seen life from my side. So it's kind of making a similar point, right? But there's an important difference with this particular example. And there's a counter meme that's gone around that I found, which says, but one of these people is wrong because someone painted a 6 or a 9. and they need to back up and orient themselves to see if there are other numbers to align with. Maybe there's a driveway or a building to face where they can ask someone who actually knows. So this is the difference now, that you have the same problem of subjective perception, but there's also the added variable of the reality, which we need to take a step back and assess in order to figure out whether it's a 6 or a 9. It's definitely a 6 or a 9. It is not both, right? So someone actually is wrong. And that's important to understand. But why is this so hard to do? And here's another example to show you. Which direction is this dancer going? I promise you it's not a trick. So just look at it for a minute and see which direction it's going for you, and then see if you can get it to go in the other direction. See if there's anything you can focus on to flip it. Now, even I can't do this very easily, and I've been doing this for a bit. So the way your mind works is it's filling in information that it's not being given, because this is a silhouette and because certain curves and certain lines are not there. Your brain has to just fill in that information. And depending on who you are, depending on your perspective, the dancer might be spinning clockwise or counterclockwise. And depending on how you try to shift your perspective, you can actually get it to change. And I'll show you. So now if you look on the left, you'll see certain lines are given to you, and both the picture on the left and in the middle are going in the same direction. But if you focus on the right, you'll see there are slightly different lines that are being given, and suddenly the center image and the right image are going in the same direction. Now, why is this happening? It's because once you're given certain information, your perspective on reality actually changes. Your perspective on what's actually going on changes. So when you don't have enough information, it's very difficult to tell what's what. All of this is just to say that the disagreements that we have with other people about contentious topics, about even the nature of reality, have so much to do with our own perception and what information we do and do not have, and why we do and do not have certain information. And so that brings us to, how do we fix this problem? How do we get past this? And as this image shows, if you are given certain information, you're able to understand things differently than you initially did. So now to tie it all together, there's this thing that I put together. It's human nature to value the vanquishing of monsters as an act of power and valor. But once we run out of monsters, we resort to making monsters of men, and then we become monsters ourselves. But imagine if instead we valued making men out of monsters. That would be power and valor. We have this innate human desire to vanquish evil, to conquer bad things, and to do the right thing, and to be good. And everyone is the hero of their own story, right? So everyone in an image of David and Goliath, everyone is David. No one thinks they're Goliath, right? Everyone thinks they're in Star Wars. Nobody thinks they're the Empire, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that perception that we have of ourselves as the hero, even when maybe we might not be. So when it comes to engagement, there are a few different ways that people approach things. And we're going to start with the wrong way to do things, which is called straw manning. And it's a logical fallacy where you caricature or distort somebody's argument, whether intentionally or not. It could be through misunderstanding, or it could be a kind of deceptive move on your part, because it's easier to tear down that caricature than it is to engage with the real thing. Right. And this is something that happens all the time. I'm sure it's happened to you. You might not have heard the term before, but I'm sure you're familiar with the feeling of, no, this person is completely misinterpreting what I just said. They're turning what I think into a cartoon. and then making a joke of it. So an example of straw manning. So let's say somebody is in favor of universal basic income, right? They want to ameliorate the loss of jobs due to automation. A straw man argument for that is, so you want people to sit at home all day and collect free money, right? Now, very few people would say, yes, that's exactly what I want. That's exactly what I meant, right? That's not actually what they're arguing, but it's an easy way to make a mockery of it and to sort of dismiss it that way. More contentious, on the pro-abortion side, you would strawman that as you want to murder babies, like someone is just has this bloodthirst for unborn children, right? That's a way that certainly people do strawman this perspective. And on the other side, for people who are against abortion, you want to control women's bodies, right? There's this assumption of horrible intent, this assumption of maliciousness. And very few people would agree that that is a fair characterization of what they actually think. So the perils of straw manning, obviously, it's dishonest. It's counterproductive because you're not engaging with the real person, the person's real views. You're engaging with a cartoon character version of it. And it makes monsters out of people who just disagree with you about something. Now, remember the mailbox and remember the 6 or the 9. There is an objective reality out there, and there is a subjective perception that people have based on who they are, what their experiences are. And when we use those things against one another and caricature one another rather than understand one another, we don't get anywhere. We actually make enemies where we don't have to. Now, what you're supposed to do, and everyone who knows me recognizes this guy. What you're supposed to do is steel man. And that is the opposite of straw manning. It's to engage with the strongest possible version of your opponent's argument. So in practice, this would basically be repeating their position back to them, repeating their argument back to them in a way that they would agree with. You want them basically to say, yes, that's exactly what I mean. Or yes, you got it exactly right. Yes, that's my point. And in fact, if you can do better than that, if you can improve upon their argument or articulate it more clearly and get them to say, in fact, you did a better job explaining it than I did, then you're really in good shape. And the reason this matters is because you are first of all ensuring yourself that you understand what exactly it is you're engaging with, but also you're assuring the other person that you're listening. You are showing them that you're there and present and not trying to malign them or mischaracterize what they believe, which makes them more likely to listen to what you have to say. So, as an example, universal basic income, right? Somebody says they want to ameliorate the loss of jobs due to automation. The steel man of that would be, okay, so you want to decouple work from economic security. You don't want those things to be linked together because the changing landscape of labor might disrupt this. And you don't want people to end up poor and starving and struggling for no fault of their own just because we've developed machines that can do their jobs. Right? It's more likely that somebody's going to say, yeah, that's what I'm concerned about. That's really what I'm trying to say here. And it puts you on better footing. And even with really difficult topics like abortion, you want to preserve bodily autonomy. That's a pro-abortion stance. You care very much about someone being able to make decisions about their own self, right? That's what they believe. You don't have to agree with it. You just have to understand it. And then for the other side, against abortion, you want to protect the unborn. That's something that's very important to you. And that's why you have the position that you have. So there are arguments against steel manning that I get all the time. Why should I help strengthen terrible or immoral arguments? Well, first of all, not all arguments are as morally or intellectually settled as racism or Nazism, right? And it's important to remember that it is you who might be mistaken. It is you who might not be understanding something. So engaging honestly and attempting to steelman is the best way to find out what you might be missing or to understand the thing you disagree with more deeply. And the second thing, the argument might be settled for you, but clearly it isn't for others because they're still making those arguments. So engaging with it is the best way to eliminate it. And lastly, it's more of a practical thing for your own sake. If you could think of a better version of an argument, but you neglect to engage with that, you're being dishonest and it will come back to bite you most likely, but you're also wasting everyone's time, including your own. What's the point of not just jumping to the most difficult thing, right? It's like dishes in the sink. Like, I'm not going to go do those dishes. I'm just going to let all that food get hard and crusty and stuck to the plate. It's going to take more scrubbing later to clean. So that's one thing. And then another thing, it's a misunderstanding of steel manning, which is to say, I must abandon my sense of logic and reasoning. And no, it doesn't mean agreeing with or condoning the other argument. It merely requires understanding it fully. So, for example, someone can understand the reasoning behind a fundamentalist Christian calling for prayer in schools or being against gay marriage without holding their beliefs or agreeing with them. It's just like a good math teacher can understand how a student arrived at a particular wrong answer without suddenly changing their mind about the correct answer. It's the same thing. It's more about seeing their work and understanding them. Again, why do they see the mailbox as big versus small? Why do they see a 6 versus a 9? So why isn't steel manning working? Why don't we see this? I'm sure that you've noticed that not a lot of people do this. Not a lot of people go out of their way or put in the effort to do this sort of thing. And the issue is that we're not just straw manning our opponent's arguments, we're also straw manning our opponents. We're making monsters of them. And once we do that, it's no surprise that anything we see or hear from these people that we've characterized that way seems monstrous. Monsters are, by definition, beneath contempt, beyond charity. They are to be vanquished, not engaged with. So, what do we do when everyone we disagree with is not just mistaken, but monstrous? And when those with whom we disagree feel the same way about us? That's where star manning comes in. So star manning takes it a step above the steel manning paradigm. And it's to engage not only with the strongest and most charitable version of your opponent's argument, but also with the strongest and most charitable version of your opponent by explicitly acknowledging their intentions and your shared desires as human beings, despite your surface disagreements. And we'll get a little bit more into that. So it's star manning is founded on one single and very safe assumption. I consider it as safe an assumption as within the next 24 hours, everyone in this Zoom call is going to be hungry because it's in my view that biologically programmed. Most people, most of the time, are doing what they believe is right, good, and just, or at the very, very least, justifiable given their ends. And those righteous ends matter. The idea they have in their head about what they're doing and why they're doing it is the critical point that you need to understand in order to understand not only their argument, but also to engage more constructively with them and to connect with them on a human level. So, very, very few people are consciously acting to make the world a worse place to live, right? Very, very, very few people wake up every morning and twirl their mustache and think, how can I cause the most possible pain and suffering today? Almost no one thinks like that. Most people get up and they do the thing they think they should be doing because the thing they think they should be doing is the right thing to do. And at bottom, we're all human beings. We're wired the same way at our core. And we have evolved to desire and pursue the same basic goals, which I break down into 4 different categories: safety, security, satisfaction, and success. Now, those 4 goals, when you start to spread out, they get very diverse and a lot of them conflict with one another. But if you boil it back down, you see that everything we want and everything we try to do and everything we care about somehow relates to one or more of these things. And it's just human biology, it's human psychology, it's just the way we're wired. The same way flowers lean toward the sun, the same way we take our hand off a hot stove, it's that core to our humanity. And that, I think, is the integral starting point for doing this sort of thing. You don't always have to dig that far. It could be easier some point along the way to find a point of commonality, but that's the underlying assumption, is that it's there. You can find it if you dig deep enough. And the approach of star manning is rooted in compassion. And that is, there are a bunch of different definitions for it. The one that's relevant to this conversation is an understanding that different people have different upbringings, educations, experiences, and temperaments. And all of those things inform their opinions and behaviors, right? So just the fact that Elmo is short changes his view of the world enough that he can't agree that the mailbox is a certain size, right? And as a result of this reality that we all come from our own special mix of genes plus environment, we will often have conflicting or competing ideas about how to move forward in the world. But the vast majority of us will agree that we want to move forward, right? Progress is a thing that generally people think is good. People think, yeah, I want things to get better. And they'll agree with that. Now, the details is where we differ. But as long as we have that sort of fundamental foundational agreement, we can engage. We can go, okay, well, what's the best way to get to where we're trying to go? So the recognition that most people are acting out of a sincere desire to make the world a better place, even if they're mistaken, and even if their world for them really just means me and my family, or me and the people that I care about, and nobody else, that recognition allows us to approach disagreement differently. And the truth is that most people aren't monsters at all. They're just sometimes under the sway of monstrous ideas. They believe things that lead them to do monstrous things. But if they could see that there's a better way, the vast majority of people would change. So that includes us. That's the other key component to this, is that, we're here, we're talking about, well, when somebody's wrong, this is the way that you approach them. And this is the way that you convince somebody out of their terrible ideas. You have to recognize as well that you might be the one with the terrible idea. You might be the one who's wrong. So you have to be open as well to this same treatment. So to Starman, the pro-abortion side, for example, you believe that there are circumstances in which a woman may want or need to terminate a pregnancy. And because women's bodily autonomy is hard won and worthy of protection, you're in favor of abortion rights. Now, that to me feels like something that someone who's staunchly in favor of abortion rights would agree. Yes, that's exactly right. That's how I feel. You're totally getting me. Right? You don't just understand my argument, you understand why I care about this. And similarly for the other side, you believe that an unborn child is an innocent human being with the right to live, but no power to advocate for itself. Because killing innocent human beings is immoral and unacceptable, you're against abortion rights, right? Again, that's something that touches at the core of the values that the people who hold this position have, the thing that's motivating them. And it's a good thing, really. Now, again, you don't have to agree, you just have to understand. And once you understand, and once you communicate that you can understand, you'll be amazed at how much easier the conversations go. So, star manning in practice, I'm going to break it down in 3 steps, right? There's complexity in those 3 steps, right? And it takes time, and we'll talk about that, but here are the 3 steps. And I'm actually going to send you a link right now to a one sheet that I put together that gives you that. So feel free to click that link and download it and keep it by your desk or whatever you want to do. So number 1, confirm. That's the steel manning part. Restate their position in a way that they would agree with. You don't move forward from this until you've gotten it right. And it could take multiple tries. Excuse me. It could take multiple tries and it'll take patience. But this is where you must start. And again, you have in the back of your head that my goal here is to understand this human being, not just their argument. Then communicate. This is the part where it can go back and forth quite a lot. Locate and acknowledge the fundamental human desires motivating them and how you share those desires. So, depending on your knowledge, depending on your relationship with this person, you might already have the answer to this. You might already be able to do this. But if you can't, if it's a total stranger, and if it's something that you are, it's alien to you and you completely don't understand it, this is where you ask questions. This is where you engage with sincere curiosity. It must be sincere. I think people can tell when they're being taken for a ride. So this can't just be a tactic. It has to be a genuine desire to understand. Ask questions. Keep asking questions. Okay, well, tell me about that. Why is this important to you? What is it that you think will happen if this thing that you're advocating for doesn't happen? What are you worried about? What do you care about? Why does this mean so much to you? Once you do that, you will find that there's a kind of dropping of the fists and a change in the engagement. And I can tell you that I've had this happen to me multiple times. So I know it's possible, even with the most antagonistic and hardcore and vicious people. Once you do that, then you collaborate. So you use the shared goals and common ground to guide productive engagement. So you say, okay, well, you care very much about suffering. You care about people not suffering. So do I. Here's my issue with the thing you're saying, though. What I'm worried about is if we do that, then XYZ might happen. And that also leads to suffering. So, what if we try to find another way that avoids this problem, but also addresses the thing you're concerned about? Now, you see what I did there? I changed from I believe this, you believe this, to, well, what if we did this? What if we engage this way? What if we tried to figure out this way? Now you have, rather than excuse me, now you have, rather than a competitor, you have a collaborator. You have somebody you can engage with who comes from a different perspective, who can offer a different point of view. You can enlist them in helping to solve this problem, or at least getting a little bit further in the engagement to finding some kind of resolution. So always remember that there is a human being, a living, breathing person full of flaws, faults, dreams, aspirations, pain, love, and everything else that makes up the human experience on either end of any interaction. And that includes social media. Those random people with random names and random pictures, that's almost certainly a person. And even if it's a bot, you're better off acting as though it's a person. And that person has feelings and that person cares about things. That person might be going through things. They might be suffering. They might be dealing with issues. They might have lots of issues. They might have mental issues. They might be unstable. Who knows? They might be 10 years old. So keep that in mind when you're engaging, right? That it's a human being. It's not just an abstraction, sorry. Engage with honesty, humility, compassion, and humanity. That's the only way to get through these very difficult topics, right? I just skirted past abortion, which is like really intense, right? And again, this will not automatically or necessarily solve the problem of abortion, just doing this kind of engagement, but it makes the kinds of conversation, the kinds of engagement that could solve the problem possible. And that's all we can do as ourselves. So, with that, thank you very much. And we'll open it up to questions.